This lady was absolutely convinced he was really in love with her. And this guy used all his Tinder dates to pay the bill. What else were some of the craziest romance scams we covered in 2024? Let's get right to it in this marathon video. Number 6. Grandmother got scammed by a man from Ghana. A lonely grandmother and former probation officer from the UK, Beth Haining, warned other women about the perils of falling for online scams. She was conned out of £18,000 by her Ghanaian lover, Rodney Cujo. Beth fell for Rodney, a then 39-year-old Ghanaian musician 30 years younger than Beth, after meeting him on a dating app. Despite warnings from her children, she flew to Ghana, where Rodney proposed to her in front of friends, leading to a hasty wedding ceremony. Upon returning to the UK, Beth paid £3,000 to secure Rodney's spouse visa, only to find his demeanor abruptly changed. Despite initially being affectionate and attentive in Ghana, Rodney became sullen, moody, and critical in Britain. Beth, who had generously funded his ventures and provided for his needs, experienced continuous arguments and dissatisfaction from Rodney, who childishly complained about British weather, food, and work expectations. The once loving relationship turned sour, and Beth decided not to renew Rodney's visa, providing him with enough money for a return flight to Ghana. Unexpectedly, Rodney stayed in the UK and falsely accused Beth of hitting him. Beth, a 5'5" grandmother, was shocked by the accusation, which led to police involvement. She somehow wasn't charged anything, since we all know what menaces short grandmotherly women are. But the incident prompted her to file for divorce. Beth, co-author of the book The Girls Who Refuse to Quit, reflected on her experience, admitting she fell for the charm of a good-looking younger man from Africa who, in her opinion, was only interested in her money. She urges other women to be cautious and not fall for similar scams. Despite her background in risk assessments with criminals as a probation officer, Beth still wasn't able to see all the red flags she probably should have. Cujo, currently living in Birmingham and claiming asylum, maintained that he genuinely loved Beth and wanted the relationship to work. He said that the money was intended for joint business ventures, and his decision to speak to police was part of the reporting process required by the Home Office. So, what do you think? She meets this guy online, 30 years younger than her, and gets married to him basically right when she gets off the plane. Was it obvious that she was being taken for a ride, or because there was a ceremony with friends and family, Cujo's feelings might have been genuine? Let us know in the comments section. Number 5. The Hefty Catfish. Scammer Carrie Ann Williams used pictures of pretty women to dupe men into sending her money. Carrie Ann's scam was simple. She would get on dating apps, use the picture of a beautiful woman as her profile picture, and get into virtual relationships with men as a means to defraud them. So she's basically everyone currently online, right? Anyway, after getting into these relationships, Carrie Ann would find a way to get these men to send her money without ever meeting them. She usually told them that she had really bad ex or current boyfriends who put hands on her and that she needed help. Through this, she was able to con 19 men into giving her a total of £20,000. She scammed one guy using different identities 4 times. She was able to get £6,000 in total from him. Carrie Ann always told the pensioner that she would be his carer, but every time he sent her money, she stopped talking to him and then created another profile to start the scam over again. But the scamming gig came to an end when one victim hired a private investigator and another told the police about her scam. She was eventually arrested, and after being caught, Carrie Ann admitted 2 counts of fraud by false representation and asked for 17 counts of fraud to be taken into consideration, likely as part of a plea deal. The judge gave her a 2-year prison sentence for her efforts. Number 4. The Fake Italian. A 68-year-old widow from Long Island, Jane Cunningham, fell victim to a dating app scam on Zoosk, to a scammer posing as a British petroleum contractor named Andrea Manuel. Over the course of about 8 months, the imposter swindled Jane in increasing amounts until he stole about $3 million. Claiming to be from Italy, Manuel convinced Jane to write checks for various reasons, including $24,000 to help with his allegedly damaged damaged oil rig, $465,000 after claiming he was picked up by Border Patrol in Texas, and a staggering $2 million for unpaid taxes. Manuel assured Jane that he had completed his contract with BP, retired, and was planning to return from the Gulf of Mexico to meet her in person. But this meeting never took place. The only evidence that Manuel, or Andrea, gave as proof he was a real guy was a copy of a license and passport, which we suppose is a fair amount of proof, right? He then told Jane that her $2 million bank check was stolen, with most of it deposited in an account belonging to someone named Sonia Gonzalez. So Jane went to the police about it, but still wrote 2 more checks totaling roughly $70,000 as instructed by Manuel. Eventually, she met with the FBI and filed a report with the Nassau County Police Department. Jane's lawyers requested Chase Bank to freeze activity related to an account where the remaining $1.9 million in stolen funds was believed to be. However, the bank said it couldn't provide information without a subpoena because of course it can't. At the time of this video, Jane's lawyers have filed to demand banking details necessary to file a claim against the alleged fraudsters, urging cooperation from Chase Bank, who apparently doesn't feel like cooperating. Number 3. Serial romance scammer. Former car salesman and full-time scammer Mark Raven, dubbed Britain's Tinder Swindler, was sentenced to 8 years in jail for defrauding 2 women out of more than £400,000 through an elaborate romance scam. Raven, 61, met grandmother Janet Pye on a dating app and manipulated her into selling her house and funding expensive trips, including one for their marriage in Las Vegas. Over an 18-month period, Raven scammed Pye out of roughly £320,000, forcing her to declare bankruptcy. Raven has an extensive criminal history with 58 previous convictions, including thefts and obtaining property by deception during his time as a car salesman. His activities extended beyond Pye as detectives discovered a second victim, Janice Tan from Singapore, who fell prey to Raven's timeshare scam. Raven posed as an investigator, promising to recover lost funds for Tan. Instead, he tricked her into sending £108,000, claiming to be seriously ill in Dubai and needing the money for medical bills. Raven admitted to 2 counts of fraud and received a stern 8-year prison sentence. As for Pye, Raven convinced her to sell her £320,000 home, assuring her they would soon be purchasing a property worth over £1 million. Then, over a year, Pye transferred more than £200,000 into Raven's account, resulting in a total financial loss of £393,000 as she funded extravagant spending, took out loans, and accumulated debt. Raven had presented himself as a millionaire engaged in property transactions and told her his money was tied up overseas. In court, the judge condemned Raven for being a terrible person, saying that both victims trusted him implicitly, thinking they were entering into genuine romantic relationships. The prosecution also emphasized the emotional and financial devastation caused by Raven's behavior and urged Chase Bank to cooperate as the legal proceedings continue. Because, of course, they're not cooperating. And really, after 58 previous convictions, at what point is this guy going to get locked up for a much longer sentence? Because he's clearly not learning his lesson. Seriously, are they looking at his rap sheet like, well, if he gets all the way to 65 convictions, then that's a pattern and we need to stop him? Come on. Number 2, Venmo me for the PJ? An Australian woman known only as Jane fell victim to a catfishing scam involving a fraudster posing as Hawaii Five-0 star Alex O'Loughlin. Over a span of more than 2 years, the scammer, operating through Facebook under the name Alex O'Loughlin Official, conned Jane out of her entire life savings of $45,000. The catfishing scheme began innocently when Jane liked a Facebook account named Alex O'Loughlin Private. Subsequently, she received a message from Alex O'Loughlin Official, initiating a conversation about her fandom. The scammer went to great lengths, providing deep-faked video calls with O'Loughlin's face and forged copies of the actor's passport, driver's license, and divorce certificate, all aimed at convincing Jane of his authenticity. The relationship eventually turned romantic, with the scammer claiming to have divorced his wife to marry Jane. Despite her skepticism, the scammer professed love, even sending pictures of a wedding ring, promising marriage. However, throughout their interaction, the imposter consistently demanded money for various reasons, such as joining an exclusive O'Loughlin membership club or covering alleged hospital bills resulting from a car accident with O'Loughlin's co-star Scott Conn. Jane, caught in the web of deceit, sent the scammer her entire tax return, transferred money through Bitcoin, and even sent additional funds weekly. The scammer even promised to travel to Australia to meet Jane, prompting her to send thousands of dollars for the journey, including expenses for security, aviation fuel, and fixing a fault on his private jet. The absurdity reached new heights when Jane was told that the actor had been kidnapped after landing in Australia and a ransom was demanded. Despite the manager's insistence of an additional $5,000, Jane refused and demanded the ransom note, realizing the implausibility of the situation. Eventually, Jane discovered the scam and reported it to the police in Australia and Hawaii. The ludicrous nature of the scam, including the request for payment of expenses for flying on a private jet, shows how far these scammers are willing to go. The thing that's sad about this is that it's not like Jane was some complete moron just going along with it. This dude literally deep-faked phone calls to trick her. Short of seeing Alex O'Loughlin in person, with how advanced technology is today, it's understandable to see how convincing scams like this can be. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here to find out about this natural-born scammer. Number 1. Catfish gone right. Catfishing victim Nicole Hayden fell in love with the man whose picture was used to lure her into the scam. It started when Hayden received an Instagram DM from a guy named Marcus. They exchanged messages, but when Marcus said they should get married and spend the holidays together, Hayden knew she was speaking to a scammer and blocked him. Marcus had contacted her on WhatsApp and threatened to Photoshop an unsavory image of her and post it online if she didn't give him money. He was going to use a picture of Hayden in a bikini, which she had sent him when they first started talking. The scammer demanded $6,000 to not share the image and threatened to harm her kids if she didn't comply, which is a bit of an escalation. We're gonna post questionable pictures of you and possibly harm your kids. Who are these people? Jeez. The mother of two said he could do whatever he wanted with the image as she was unwilling to give him the money, and luckily, no harm came to her or her family. Months after the ordeal, an account using Marcus's picture was suggested to her on Instagram. The difference was that this man's name was Alessandro Cinquini, and this time, the profile was legitimate. She reached out to Cinquini, who revealed that scammers often used his picture and there were hundreds of profiles attached to his face. Although he used to try to get the profiles taken down, he had given up on eradicating the scam profiles. He said he's been confronted multiple times in public, once while at a restaurant eating dinner. Others accused him of ghosting them or stealing from them. Hayden was reluctant to get her hopes up when they first started dating, but soon fell for Cinquini. Despite the circumstances surrounding how they met, at least this scam has a happy ending. Who are some of the worst romance scammers around? Let's find out, starting with number 4. It was the soup. A scammer posing as soap opera star Thorsten Kaye convinced Roxanne Doucette to poison her husband. Although the senior Massachusetts woman thought she was talking to Kaye, best known for his role in The Bold and the Beautiful, she was actually talking to a fraudster. But the problem wasn't as much that this was a fake Thorsten Kaye, but more of what he said to her. During one of their conversations, the fake Kaye had told Doucette that in order to be together, she needed to get rid of her husband, Paul. So, while Paul was out, Doucette got busy making him a special type of soup. So Doucette texted the scammer to let him know her plan, explaining that Paul would be hungry when he got back from wherever he was and would happily eat the soup, which he did, and complained of a sore stomach right after eating it. While the poison was making Paul feel sick, Doucette excitedly texts the scammer again to tell him her husband wasn't feeling well. She also suggested that maybe she could even collect life insurance, exciting the scammer, who wanted to know how soon the money would be available. Paul started to become extremely ill, and Doucette called 911 a few hours later. Paramedics rushed him to Neshoba Valley Medical Center, and the couple's daughter, Nicole Heath, met them there. For whatever reason, Heath was going through her mother's phone and became suspicious that she had something to do with Paul's sudden sickness. So she took a series of screenshots, which she shared with the police, while telling them that she was pretty sure her mom had poisoned her dad. Doucette denied the allegations and sobbed to reporters that the soup she gave Paul was just old, not poisoned, which is exactly what someone who poisoned soup would say. She also said she loved him and wasn't capable of what she's accused of. However, her text exchange with the person she thought was Kay told a very different story. In December of 2023, a day after the alleged poisoning, law enforcement arraigned Doucette and released her on her own reconnaissance. Her husband's toxicology report came back negative, but the court ordered her to not contact Paul and to stay at least 100 yards away from him. The court also ordered a mental health evaluation and made her wear a GPS monitor, as she was only allowed to leave her home for doctor's appointments. Paul said the soup seemed off and had a bitter taste, so there was still reason to investigate. Doucette admitted to the police that she had told Paul she was going to go on a retreat, but then revealed that she had made the whole thing up. She also confessed to messaging the fake soap opera star. Apparently, she always wanted to meet a famous person, so everything she accused of makes sense, right? She insisted she was innocent in her police report. Don't they all? Adding that she was afraid to be alone and would never do anything to hurt her husband. Doucette also added that she loved her children and didn't want her daughter to think she was the reason Paul was in the hospital. Paul was allegedly under a lot of stress before the poisoning too, and had recently lost $8,000 in a scam. So the idea that he was already in a bad place isn't unfounded. Doucette was back in police custody days after she was released when she violated court orders to avoid contact with Paul by sending him a handwritten note, which she asked a neighbor to mail on her behalf. In the letter, the scorned wife begged her husband to drop the restraining order because she missed him so much. She received additional charges of resisting arrest and hitting an officer after police attempted to take Doucette's phone and tablet for evidence. Doucette fought back and kicked one of the officers to stop them from getting access to her things, like all other wives who didn't poison their husbands and would do anything to prove that. Of course, the cops won and eventually seized her belongings. This case is ongoing, and we'll have an update in the future, but from what we know so far, it's not looking good for Doucette. In an interview, she said that her son is a chef and her own mother was pretty talented and that she was a good cook herself, so she didn't want people thinking her cooking was dangerous. However, it is to die for. Yeah. It was an easy joke, but we had to. Number 3, grinding out the money. Canadian fraudster Christian Richardson posed as a sugar daddy to scam vulnerable young men out of thousands of dollars, using Grindr to target young men in their 20s. Sugar daddies are usually older men who pay attractive young people for companionship. Richardson had pretended to be a wealthy businessman who would pay the men on his payroll. However, these paychecks were made out of rubber and bounced. Richardson also convinced the men to withdraw thousands of dollars from their accounts, which he just pocketed. The stolen money funded elaborate shopping sprees and fueled Richardson's gambling habit. Eventually, one of his victims told a local bank that he thought someone was scamming him. Police arrested Richardson, but later released him on bail. He was supposed to check into a recovery center while out on bail, but instead, he just went back to scamming. Richardson picked up a young man under the guise of a rich entrepreneur and tried to take him on a little trip. Luckily, law enforcement pulled him over midway through the journey. As the officer approached Richardson's vehicle, he hit the accelerator and sped off. Richardson then abandoned the car with the victim still inside and ran into the woods. When officers reached the vehicle and found the victim sitting, visibly shaken, in the passenger seat, authorities found Richardson in the early hours of the morning at a convenience store and arrested him again. And this wasn't Richardson's first brush with the law either. He had a decade-long criminal record of instances of fraud and similar offenses, surprising no one. Richardson addressed the court and stated that he was going to seek psychological counseling to address his issues. But given his rap sheet, multiple convictions for the exact same thing, and 13 of them earned him some time, it was pretty clear he wasn't learning any sort of lesson. Well, maybe he was learning something, but it definitely wasn't what the court wanted him to learn. Richardson said he wished he could rewind and undo the harm he caused his victims, and the court sentenced him to 15 months in prison. And you know that dude he picked up was like, "You're not gonna believe what happened on that date I was just on." Seriously, you're going on a first date, and before you even get to where you're going, the person gets in a chase with the police and then suddenly runs off into the woods? What do you even do after that? Just go home and watch TV? Do you have any crazy first date experiences? Let us know in the comments below. follow. Number 2. Cruel couple scammed elderly and vulnerable victims. Romance scammers Ibrahim Morrow and Rebecca Patrick scammed hundreds of thousands of dollars from vulnerable and elderly victims. Morrow and Patrick made fake profiles on dating websites, which they used to target their victims. The victims thought they were forming a romantic connection, but were actually speaking to one of the couple's fake accounts. An elderly Australian man had fallen in love with Rebecca and believed they were in a romantic relationship. Once she earned the man's trust, she asked him to send her some money to buy winter clothes. So he did, since that wasn't a big ask. But then she said she had a 78-kilogram holding of gold, which is worth about $5 million, stuck in Ghana and needed cash to release it, which had to have been kind of a weird conversation. Hey, can I borrow money for some winter clothes? Oh, and to release my $5 million of gold? Over a year, the victim sent $163,000 for Rebecca to get the gold, as well as other sums of cash and a new cell phone. But the elderly Australian wasn't the couple's only target. In 2016, another victim's new online partner convinced her to send them $22,700 as they were having issues with insurance. But the cash went straight to Morrow and Patrick. That same year, another woman thought she had formed a close relationship with a German widower who bought gold, silver, and diamonds on behalf of his clients. Morrow told the victim that he was abroad and had bought some precious stones, but had to pay taxes on the items before he could leave the country. He then said that if she didn't send him the money, then it meant she didn't care about him. Since she valued the relationship, she eventually wired him the funds. Although the victim thought the $3,150 was going to her German friend, she had unknowingly sent it to Patrick's bank account. Morrow and Patrick scammed multiple victims worldwide until the National Crime Agency investigated the couple's actions and found email evidence of their scam. Investigators uncovered the email account used to defraud several victims, which contained the financial evidence the scammers provided their targets. Morrow and Patrick were arrested for fraud and possessing criminal property. Morrow claimed he used the money to fund his clothing business in Ghana, and Patrick said she only gave Morrow access to her account so he could send cash to his family in Ghana. Patrick was sentenced to 18 months in prison, suspended for 18 months, and Morrow was sentenced to 5.5 years. Tragically, by the time the couple received their sentences, that first Australian victim had passed away. This sad story is a good time to remember to reach out to your elderly loved ones and check on them, since these scams are becoming more and more common. The only way to combat them is to not fall for them. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here for our past release to find out how this guy somehow saved money by cheating on his wife. Number 1. Romanced and fleeced. A romance scammer stole $70,000 from real estate agent Christina LaBarbera after connecting on a dating app. LaBarbera met Rob Harris in April of 2023, and the two quickly formed a connection. Harris posed as a successful real estate agent, and it didn't take long for the couple to decide to move in together. So the New Jersey-based realtor headed to Florida to visit Harris and tour homes. But right before her flight, Harris sent her a frantic text saying the police pulled his car over and arrested him. Apparently, he had an outstanding warrant that he didn't know about, stemming from a DV incident. Always a good thing to suddenly happen when you're about to board a plane to meet your new boyfriend he thought had been dropped. The money was to cover his alleged restitution, but LaBarbera later learned he used it to rent an Airbnb for his friend Matt. Then Harris reached out with another request for a $4,000 loan for a yacht. He promised that he would pay LaBarbera back with cash from his safe when she got to Florida. LaBarbera landed in Florida, excited to finally spend time with her new boyfriend. That's not what happened. When LaBarbera arrived, Harris immediately asked her to cover their $12,500 Airbnb and $1,300 in additional expenses, promising his mom would pay her back. And when she got stressed about the money, he sent her a screenshot of his bank statement, which had a balance of $720,000 to reassure her. And despite not paying her back, he told her he would put in an offer on both of their behalf on a $1.5 million condo. Since he seemed to have so much money in the bank, LaBarbera kept loaning him the cash. She sent him $50,000 in 1 month and paid $6,400 for Drake concert tickets in another. The new repayment plan was for Harris to pay her back when he visited her in New Jersey. So she waited at the airport with cupcakes, but he never showed up. Harris claimed an armed robber stole his wallet, but by then she figured out that he was a scammer. The accomplished real estate agent confronted him over text, but all he said was that he was sorry. He stole $70,000 from La Barbera, who filed a complaint in civil court in early 2024. As of this video, Harris has yet to even acknowledge the case. And hey, we're not directly saying anything here, but we're casually pointing out that there are certain stereotypes associated with people who have Italian last names and live in New Jersey. Maybe scamming her wasn't a good idea, Rob. You might be getting a visit from Uncle Vinny and his associates. Who are a few of the worst romance scammers around? Would it be this influencer who kidnapped a wealthy businessman and then forced him to play Russian roulette? Or is it this nurse who catfished women into sending compromising photos just for fun? Or is it this guy who got money from women by promising to go on vacation with them? Let's find out all the details, starting with number 6, Russian roulette. Roani da Silva Sampaio, a self-proclaimed digital influencer, was sentenced to 23 years for her involvement in a shocking armed robbery in Brazil. She lured a wealthy businessman, Abel Landum, under the pretense of meeting for a private encounter at his luxury apartment. But that private encounter ended up not being what Landum was expecting. While Sampaio kept Landum distracted, her boyfriend, Francisco Moises Sousa Batista Jr., and 2 accomplices broke into the apartment. They bound Landum with plastic zip ties. Then Batista began to brutalize him, using a loaded firearm to scare the poor man. The group demanded that Landum reveal where he had hidden his valuables, escalating the pressure by playing a cruel game of Russian roulette. Fearing for his life, Landum eventually gave in. The gang stole a large sum of cash, cameras, and other high-end items before raiding his bank accounts after forcing him to reveal his passwords. Security footage showed the group kicking in the apartment door, armed and ready to take whatever they could. Despite the terrifying situation, Landum managed to call the police while the gang ransacked his home. Officers arrived in time to arrest Sampaio and her boyfriend, bringing the terrifying ordeal to an end. Sampaio, who had helped plan the entire heist by tipping off her boyfriend, was convicted alongside the other members of the group. Batista and his accomplices were sentenced to 20 years each, and the group was also ordered to pay 10,000 Brazilian real, which is roughly $2,000, in compensation to the victim. Number 5. Wrong vibes only. Nurse Adele Rennie was sentenced to 22 months after being convicted of using fake male identities to stalk and harass multiple victims. Between 2012 and 2016, Rennie manipulated her victims through social media and dating sites, using these false personas to engage in provocatively charged conversations, solicit explicit photos, and then she'd blackmail the victims when they tried to end contact. Rennie, who worked at Cross House Hospital, used voice-changing apps to pose as men, including doctors, and sent provocative photos of a man she claimed to be, pressuring her victims for the same in return. Her deceptive tactics extended beyond digital interactions, with some victims even receiving flowers from her aliases, and in one case, she accessed the victim's medical records to further her manipulation. In a particularly notable incident, Rennie targeted Abby Draper, a model and former Miss Scotland finalist, after meeting her at the hospital. Draper, visiting her ill grandfather, noticed Rennie constantly lingering around her family, following them to the gym and grocery store. Rennie posed as David Graham, a doctor, to connect with Draper on social media. Suspicion grew when a mutual friend recognized the fake account as the same one used to contact someone else. So naturally, the police were called. The final bit of evidence that sealed the deal was when she attempted to delete a key Instagram account and hid a mobile phone during a police search of her home. Rennie's scheme left her victims feeling unsafe, as she escalated the harassment by threatening to expose intimate photos and fabricating elaborate stories involving family members passing away. The court described Rennie's behavior as meticulously calculated, with the judge expressing disbelief over her ability to harm so many people despite having a stable job and background. She was ultimately sentenced to 1 year, 10 months in prison for her crime. The scariest thing about this case was that it seems like there was no real motive beyond just manipulating and harassing people. It's weird to hear about stories like this from someone who dedicated their life to helping people. Number 4, always needing money. Debbie Fox, an Arvada resident, lost $58,000 in a romance scam. However, the crazy thing about her story wasn't the amount she lost. It is what police discovered about tracking her money in the world of crypto. It all started when Debbie, feeling confident after 18 months of solo travel, decided to join an online dating site. There, she met a man named Russell, who claimed to be a wealthy international businessman working on a solar project in Saudi Arabia. Their connection grew quickly through video chats and deep conversations. Debbie was cautious, but felt reassured when Russell provided documents and websites to prove his legitimacy. Things took a turn when Russell told Debbie about a tragic incident involving his project in Saudi Arabia, which led to financial strain. He asked for her help, saying he needed $48,000 to cover unexpected expenses. Debbie, who was still cautious but wanting to trust the guy, wired the money. Russell stayed in touch, maintaining the illusion of their relationship, and soon asked for an additional $10,000. Debbie, convinced of his sincerity, sent the second payment. Then, Russell's supposed attorney reached out, claiming he had been arrested and thrown in prison. It was that moment when Debbie realized something was very wrong. What followed was a frustrating battle to recover her lost money. Debbie reported the crime to several federal agencies, only to be told that somehow her loss wasn't significant enough for further investigation. Left feeling powerless, she found herself struggling not just financially, but emotionally, dealing with the trauma of betrayal. Detective Adam Ross from Arvada Police took on Debbie's case, and his investigation led to a breakthrough. By tracing her money through a crypto exchange, Ross discovered a trail that could be followed. As of the release of this video, the investigation is ongoing, and international complexities remain, but Ross's work could pave the way for other departments to take similar cases more seriously. Debbie, now focused on advocacy, is writing a novel about her experience, hoping to raise awareness for victims of online scams. Number 3, honey trapping. Holly Cheeseman was sentenced to 6 years in prison for her role in a scheme that lured men back to her apartment with the promise of an intimate encounter. The men, believing they were about to spend the night with Cheeseman, definitely had an intimate encounter, but not one that they liked. As one unsuspecting man prepared for said encounter, Cheeseman's boyfriend, Jeremy Long, burst into the room with a knife, threatening him. Together, the couple forced the man to hand over his bank card. Long tried to withdraw money from the man's account, but it was empty. Long wasn't exactly happy about this unexpected state of financial affairs, and things quickly escalated. So the couple took their victim to his home, where they stole his TV, laptop, and any other valuables they could grab. Once back at Long's apartment, they settled in, watching the stolen TV, only to be interrupted by police bursting in to arrest them. Cheeseman denied her involvement, claiming she had intended to have a transactional relationship with the victim. However, a jury found her guilty of 2 counts of robbery and false imprisonment. Jeremy Long, who admitted to the charges, also received a 6-year sentence. Throughout the trial, it became clear that Cheeseman's situation was even more complicated. She was heavily pregnant during her sentencing and faced the possibility of losing custody of her child once born. The court acknowledged that the prison had a mother and baby unit, but the child could only stay with her for a limited time. Despite her defense team's pleas for leniency, citing the future of her unborn child, the judge focused on Cheeseman's disturbing lack of remorse and empathy for the victim. While the judge considered her pregnancy in the sentencing, it wasn't enough to reduce her punishment. We don't like to see children being taken from their parents, but man, it seems like that baby would be better off being raised by a pack of wolves. Number 2, honey trapping 2. A 73-year-old man, whose name wasn't released, thought he was about to embark on a romantic evening after meeting 34-year-old Chelsea Wright at a Daytona Beach bar. Wright invited him to follow her home, but what happened after they left was far more than he bargained for. As the duo headed back to Wright's place in separate cars, Wright made an unexpected stop to pick up someone from the side of the road. That someone was Andrew Marks, 33, her ex-boyfriend, though the man had no idea. The cars continued driving to a secluded area, which seems like it should have been a pretty bright red flag, where Wright suddenly dropped Marks off. Still thinking the night was heading in a romantic direction, the man got out of his car to approach Wright's vehicle. But then, things took a bad turn for the elderly man. Marks suddenly reappeared and confronted the man, using a metal object to harm him. The situation escalated, leaving the man on the ground unable to defend himself. After stealing the man's wallet, both Marks and Wright fled, leaving the 73-year-old lying there, seriously injured. The man was later rushed to the hospital with several severe injuries. When authorities got involved, they quickly began to piece together what had happened. Wright and Marks had obviously conspired to rob the man, luring him from the bar with promises of a romantic encounter. During the investigation, Wright was caught and tried to claim that the culprit was an elderly woman with Alzheimer's and not her boyfriend. Text messages between Wright and Marks revealed their plan, confirming their roles in the crime. Both Wright and Marks were arrested, and as of the release of this video, are facing charges for their roles in the robbery. Number 1. Money back. A woman from Glasgow, who preferred to remain anonymous, became the victim of an elaborate scam that cost her over £3,000. After meeting a man on Tinder, who went by the name Chris Harkins, the two quickly hit it off. They planned a luxurious trip to Mykonos, and after a few dates that went really well, she transferred a little over £3,200 to cover the cost of the hotel and flights. Everything seemed fine at first, but then things took a turn. After transferring the money, the woman grew suspicious since things were moving a little too fast. So she contacted Harkins about some small details, for example, luggage allowances, and jokingly mentioned that he better not have run off with her money, which is exactly what he did. Although he initially reassured her, it turned out that the vacation was never actually booked. Harkins then asked her for an additional £12,000, claiming his bank account was blocked. After the woman refused to give him the additional money, Harkins became less responsive, but didn't completely ghost her. When he was in contact, though, he continued to make excuses about his bank account being blocked and kept promising her that he would return the money. Months passed with no sign of repayment, until Harkins reached out again, promising to meet and return the money. But unsurprisingly, he never bothered showing up to their meeting. The victim, understandably feeling humiliated and embarrassed, began sharing her story in the hopes of warning others. Finally, after intervention from a local newspaper, Harkins agreed to return the funds. We guess something about being publicly called out bothered him. However, he still made wild excuses, claiming his account was frozen again, and even told the woman to go to a fast food place where the money would supposedly be waiting. Ultimately, the woman did get her money back 3 months after it was initially taken. When discussing the situation, the woman said she's still deeply embarrassed, but said she hopes that by speaking out, others won't fall victim to similar schemes. She acknowledged how emotional manipulation played a role in the scam, and while it has shaken her trust, she said she's determined not to let this experience change her. Who are some of the worst romance scammers who will pull a sad scam on anyone? Let's find out, starting with number 5, sell the house. Atuna Cynthia Chiomoa is a Nigerian woman who found herself in custody after allegedly swindling a German man, Rudolf Marcus Kempf, out of $220,000. Chioma was arrested by the police special fraud unit in Nigeria. Here's what went down. Chioma met the German national on Instagram, where she pretended to be romantically interested in him and even promised marriage. Once she had his trust, she invited him to Nigeria multiple times, convincing him to relocate permanently to be with her. To make the situation seem legit, she arranged for Camp to meet her parents, who approved of their marriage because why wouldn't they approve of their young daughter marrying a 50-year-old man? Camp was so convinced of Chioma's sincerity that he actually sold his house in Stuttgart and sent the proceeds, along with his pension and life savings, to Chioma's account. She claimed these funds were for buying them a home in Nigeria and starting a joint business. However, Chioma used the money to financially support her family and to purchase a luxury 2-bedroom apartment in an upscale location in Nigeria. During the police arrest and interrogation, Chioma confessed that she received $220,000 from Camp. She pleaded not guilty to her charges, but the resolution of her case isn't publicly available. It's hard not to sympathize with Camp. It's one thing when these victims only know the person online, but he did meet Chioma multiple times face to face. Number 4. Scamming the police. Anne Larkin is a widowed former police special constable from the UK who fell victim to a heart-wrenching scam that began with a seemingly innocent online interaction. After losing her husband, Graham, unexpectedly in 2019, Anne turned to photography to cope with her grief. Anne's landscapes, posted on an amateur photography website, caught the attention of a man named Clinton, who claimed to be a U.S. Army medic stationed in Yemen. Clinton expressed a deep connection to her work, claiming it spoke to his soul and revealed his own tragic past of losing his family in an accident. Clinton and Anne quickly formed a bond as he supported her through her loneliness and grief, intensified by the isolation of the pandemic. He even used the nickname Annie, a name previously used only by her late husband. As their friendship deepened, Clinton began sharing invented hardships, skillfully manipulating Anne's emotions to gain her trust and eventually her financial support. Over time, Anne shared details of her financial security, which came from a substantial inheritance and insurance payout after her husband's passing. Clinton, seeing an opportunity, began constantly asking for money to help overcome some made-up crisis. Trusting and vulnerable, Anne started transferring funds to him, initially in small amounts that gradually increased. The request for money became more frequent, and the amounts grew larger, draining nearly all of her savings. As Anne's financial situation worsened, another scammer, known only as G, entered her life through social media. Posing as an actor involved in charitable work, G appealed to Anne's compassion with stories of helping underprivileged children, further ensnaring her in financial deceit. Anne realized she was being scammed when the scammers ended up pushing too far, suggesting she should sell her house and car after her savings were depleted. This insane suggestion made her suspicious, prompting her to wake up to the reality of the situation. In a panic, she asked her bank for statements, which confirmed the extensive financial losses she had incurred through the various transfers to the scammers. This was the moment the full extent of the deceit became clear to her, but at this point, she had lost almost £360,000 and was worried the total might reach £500,000. The betrayal left her devastated, not only financially, but emotionally, as she struggled to comprehend the extent of the lies she was told. The police and her bank began investigations, but the chances of recovering her funds were slim. The impact of the scam strained her relationships and it forced her to seek part-time work to manage her financial obligations. Even though Anne was part of the police force, sometimes emotions can still take over logic at any point in time. Number 3. The career scammer. Hamish Earl McLaren, a notorious con man from Sydney, lived a life straight out of a thriller movie, swindling over $7.6 million from unsuspecting victims, including high-profile individuals and close companions. From 2011 to 2017, McLaren duped 16 people, including the well-known Australian fashion designer Lisa Ho and his then-girlfriend Tracy Hall. His fraudulent schemes ranged from convincing victims he was a financial expert to fabricating emotional stories, like being near the World Trade Center during 9/11. McLaren, who also went by the names Hamish Watson and Max Tavita, was eventually caught and arrested by the police in July of 2017. His arrest marked the end of a long-running spree of crimes that funded a lavish lifestyle, including luxury trips and high-end vehicles. Despite his arrest, around $5.4 million of the stolen funds remained unaccounted for, suspected to be hidden in overseas accounts. McLaren's McLaren's victims included Lisa Ho, who lost $850,000 of her superannuation, which is basically an Australian retirement program, to McLaren's schemes. Another heartbreaking story came from Tracy Hall, another former girlfriend who lost $317,000, which she thought she was investing in a self-managed super fund during their relationship. Hamish McLaren led a flamboyantly extravagant lifestyle with the millions he swindled from his victims. He epitomized luxury, regularly jetting off to top global destinations and driving high-end vehicles like an Aston Martin. His need for opulence was not just limited to travel and cars either. Your boy also enjoyed the high life at exclusive properties in locales like Bondi Beach and Wulo Mulo, which would be like hanging out in Malibu or South Beach in Miami. McLaren's spending sprees included lavish parties and high-stakes gambling, burning through cash as though it were limitless. McLaren's trial drew considerable attention, with many of his victims present in court to witness his sentencing. McLaren faced the justice system resolutely, showing no remorse as he was sentenced to 16 years in prison. Tracy Hall, deeply affected by the betrayal, chose to turn her painful experience into an opportunity to help others by writing a book titled The Last Victim. In it, she aims to educate others about the dangers of financial scams, emphasizing the importance of vigilance in protecting one's financial security. As for McLaren, his story serves as a reminder of the destructive power of greed and deception, illustrating how a charming facade can hide a ruthless predator waiting to strike on the unsuspecting. His life now continues behind bars, which is pretty different from his former life he once fabricated at the expense of others. Number 2. Send crypto, please. A man from Miami fell victim to a crypto scam, losing $42,000 to a scammer posing as an executive from Estee Lauder. This scammer, who called herself Mindy Lee, connected with him on Instagram in December of 2023. The man believed he was investing in Ethereum, second to only Bitcoin basically. He began with small amounts between $500 to $1,000 on Crypto.com, where he initially saw profits. As the guy grew more confident, driven by the allure of daily gains promised by Lee, he continued to invest more money. Even when his bank warned him about the risks, he was swayed by the seeming legitimacy of his returns. Eventually, Lee convinced him to transfer his funds to another site, promising even greater returns. However, once he moved his money, communication ceased and his investments disappeared. This type of scam lures victims into investing increasing amounts before abruptly cutting contact. The man, duped by fake photos and profiles linked to Lee's name across various platforms, faced a tough reality when he realized his funds were irrecoverable. He attempted to withdraw his money, but he was told to send more payments in order to release the funds. How that even makes sense, of course it doesn't, but people still fall for it, holding on to that last shred of belief that things aren't a scam. Reflecting on his experience, the man acknowledged his mistake, lamenting his significant financial loss. The case highlights the broader issue of romance scams, which, according to the Federal Trade Commission, caused over $1 billion in losses in 2023 alone, making it the most financially damaging type of imposter scam that year. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here to find out how she got revenge on her scammer. Number 1. The Revenge Group. Brazilian Caio da Silva scammed 11 women out of a total of nearly $355,000 by posing as a charming and successful guy on dating apps. According to the Brazilian news magazine Fantástico, which is Brazilian for fantastic, he adopted various personas, including a soap opera actor, music producer, and real estate mogul facing financial hardships. His shady activities spanned several states, including Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo. The story unfolded when Thea Banheiro, one of Da Silva's victims, found out about his scams through a Fantástico report. Banheiro, who had met Da Silva while hospitalized, was conned out of about $200, which isn't a lot, but it was enough to piss her off, so she rallied other victims through a group chat. These women, feeling cheated and seeking justice, crafted a plan to catch Da Silva in a plot straight out of a Lifetime movie. They set up a fake profile on Tinder, lured him to a Rio de Janeiro Janeiro restaurant and coordinated with police to have him arrested upon his arrival. Among the victims was Talita Silva, a lawyer from Rio, who had loaned De Silva $9,900 after he convinced her of a dire financial need related to his farm. Fortunately, she managed to recover her money. Other women weren't as lucky. One recounted how she took out a bank loan of nearly $3,000 because De Silva needed to pay a fine for his farm, only to end up lending him close to $29,000. De Silva used Silva's money for extravagant purchases, totaling $9,900 on clothes, fragrances, and dining out, all the while promising repayment that never came. As these women chatted about things and put the pieces together, they discovered inconsistencies in his stories and false claims about his identity. The scorned women's efforts were crucial in bringing De Silva down, exposing a pattern of manipulation where he would introduce his victims to his family and create elaborate lies to gain their trust and their money. De Silva, previously convicted of embezzlement in 2019, but sentenced only to community service, faced multiple investigations. While De Silva's lawyers maintained his innocence to Fantastico, claiming that all his actions were simply civil offenses. But the police and his numerous victims see him as a serious criminal whose arrest was essential to prevent further scams. And still, this guy continued to run his scams, even during 5 ongoing investigations, showing that he clearly ran out of F's to give. As of the release of this video, De Silva is still awaiting trial. What are some of the worst romance scams? Let's get right to it and find out, starting with number 6. She thought he wouldn't remember it. Real estate agent Sophia Smith convinced a 90-year-old man with dementia that they were in a romantic relationship so she could swindle him out of more than $500,000. The award-winning realtor targeted widower Cornelius Connie Hoffmans after he donated to her nonprofit, ironically named Strong Arm Foundation. Although the charity advertised that it raised funds for underprivileged women and children, Smith took roughly 90% of the donations to cover her gambling habit. Apparently, she felt she was underprivileged at the blackjack tables. Despite being completely out of the closet, Smith convinced Hoffmans that she was in love with him. He thought they were dating, and Smith posted social media images where she referred to him as her best friend, which isn't the same thing as dating, and many friend-zoned guys can attest, but Connie was 90 and had mental problems, so he gets more room for confusion. But then, Smith used Hoffman's money to buy a home and RV and cover her gambling debts. My Vegas magazine named Smith a realtor with purpose in 2021, but the accomplished agent was hiding a dark secret. Smith had a problem with gambling and was in a cycle of gaining and losing large amounts of money. She was eventually arrested for exploiting Hoffman's kindness and mental state. In court, she admitted that her own problems made her greedy, and during her friendship with Hoffman's, it reached a new low. Smith also confessed to manipulating someone who cared about her for her own gain. Smith was eventually found guilty of theft, credit card fraud, and exploiting an older or vulnerable person. The disgraced real estate agent received a 6-month jail sentence and 5 years of probation. The court also ordered that she pay Hoffman's estate $300,000 in retribution. After a civil lawsuit, the widower's family took possession of Smith's home and RV. My Vegas really missed a chance for a follow-up article. The 2021 Realtor with Purpose has found a new purpose in 2022. Scamming. Number 5. Mr. Pretend. On the dating app Bumble, a swindler named Kieran McNamara conned at least 4 women out of $380,000. A woman, known only as Danielle, thought she had met a potential life partner on Bumble when she matched with Christian McNamara in September of 2021. He was a charming attorney who showered her with affection, and they spoke daily, exchanging hundreds of messages. During their video calls, McNamara not only made Danielle feel loved and beautiful, but he also got her to open up about her insecurities securities, which he would later use for exploitation. Once he earned her trust, the tone of his messages became more intimate, with her prospective partner sending revealing images and flirtatious innuendos. They also seemed to have identical problems. Danielle would talk about her bitter separation from an ex-partner, and Christian would reveal that he was going through something similar. Danielle's sister was also in the hospital at the time, so that and the fact that was ending a long-term relationship left her in a vulnerable position, and McNamara knew it. Then, in April of 2022, the money request started. At first, McNamara said he was mugged and needed cash to get the train home, so Danielle obliged, but what started with the occasional loan of $20 or $30 turned into a total of $4,050. And McNamara always had excuses for not being able to pay her back too, like not having a debit card or wanting to give her the cash in person. So Danielle made plans to meet up with him like 6 or 7 times, but he never showed. Danielle was so strapped for cash at that point that she canceled her daughter's birthday party and forced McNamara to sign an official IOU. So he responded by calling her crazy and threatening to commit her to a psychiatric hospital. She snapped and demanded he repay her, and it was at that point that she realized that the kind, charming person she had developed feelings for had been a complete lie. McNamara then sent rude and angry texts where he trashed her. Danielle reached out to law enforcement to report McNamara, but the police said what he did didn't count as fraud. Danielle felt like the cops didn't really care about her situation since she lost a relatively small amount of money. However, McNamara's failure to repay the $4,050 meant Danielle couldn't afford to pay bills or buy essential things like food and toilet paper. McNamara wasn't the person Danielle thought he was. His real name was Kieran, and he used Christian as one of his aliases to contact women on the app. And Danielle was far from the only woman he targeted. McNamara had a list of multiple false identities that he used to charm women into sending him hundreds of thousands of dollars. Danielle tried to stop him from scamming others, but he still got at least 4 more victims after her. McNamara used the money to create the farce that he was living a life of luxury, which helped him further manipulate his victims. The police finally took the women's complaints seriously, and after investigating McNamara, arrested him in September of 2023. The detective who led the investigation believed the con artist was so swept up in conning these women that he couldn't separate reality from fantasy. While pretending to be a millionaire who owned properties throughout the UK, he was jobless and living out of a suitcase. Officers raided his storage unit and found $25,000 worth of designer goods, including a Burberry coat and scarf and Gucci sneakers. Further, McNamara, who showed no remorse for his actions, was charged with 4 counts of fraud by false representation. Number 4. On the rise. Liza Likens, who was a backup singer for Fleetwood Mac, lost $1 million to a Facebook romance scam. A guy who called himself Donald had messaged her, and as time went on, she thought they had formed a genuine connection. Likens, who also did backing vocals for Stevie Nicks and Lisa Ronstadt, lost her husband Greg in 2020 after 23 years of marriage. She was close friends with Stevie Nicks and was her roommate for 10 years. Nicks was also Likens' maid of honor for her first marriage. Donald had reminded Likens of her late husband. He worked in Australia mining gold, and it took him 2.5 years to convince Likens that he was in love with her. And she fell deeply in love with Donald, who said he would move to her home in Las Vegas to be with her. But, like many scammers, he persuaded her to send him money once he gained her trust. Throughout their relationship, Likens sent Donald roughly $1 million. That money came from her life savings and selling her house, which she did for him. When she realized Donald didn't actually exist, it hit her so hard that she actually considered self-harm. Likens believes scammers targeted her after studying her Facebook profile and learning she was a lonely widow. So, Likens enlisted the help of Social Catfish, a company that helps track down scammers. The company featured Likens on its YouTube show and tracked Donald to a group of criminals in Nigeria. The fraudsters used photos of Raho Bornhorst, a German life coach, to scam Likens and hundreds of others. Bornhorst received hundreds of messages from women who thought they were in a relationship with him, and he had to explain to them that someone was using his pictures to scam. Likens is just one of many who lost money to the scam, as there was a 14% increase in the amount of money victims lost in 2023. That year, victims lost $4.6 billion to investment scams and $2.7 billion to imposter fraud. However, consumers lost the most funds to crypto and bank transfers. Since many people are too embarrassed to report scammers' actions to the authorities, these numbers were likely much higher. Number 3. The support group. In 2020, a woman, only identified as Lynn in an interview by Southwest News Service, met Derek in a Facebook group for grieving widows. He struck up a conversation with her, and they hit it off. She thought he was also a widower and felt relieved to have someone to talk about the pain she was going through. However, romance scammers instead conned Lynn, a British widow, out of $63,000 in life savings. Derek said he had recently moved from England to Dubai, where the mineral company he owned was based. The two bonded quickly over their trauma and shared the same sense of humor. After 4 months of getting to know each other, Derek needed a favor. There was an accident at the job site in Dubai, and 6 of his staff members were hurt. Derek said he was having cash flow issues and needed funds to cover the costs of his medical bills. He promised to pay Lynn interest for lending him the money, so she agreed. And with that, Derek started his scam, convincing her to cover his hotel bills and open crypto accounts so she could send him cash. When she told him she ran out of money, he said he'd have one of his business partners transfer the funds to her through his secretary. It would be in Bitcoin, which she would then need to send him so he could convert it to cash. Lynn, feeling like something was up, was too embarrassed to tell her family about the situation, but confided in a close friend who told her to be careful. Then, in January of 2021, police visited her home to tell her the truth. Fortunately, investigators tracked down the scammer and got Lynn's money back, which is nice, since that almost never happens. Lynn warned others not to fall for the same scam, as fraudsters know exactly what to say to make you feel special, especially if you're grieving the loss of a partner and your judgment is clouded. Number 2. The rigged relationship. A catfish conned a 75-year-old identified only as Ava out of almost $100,000. The UK's Channel 5 featured Ava's story after she gave away her inheritance and remortgaged her home. A stranger, who went by the name David West, contacted Ava on social media and complimented her pictures. She didn't see the harm in talking to West, a handsome engineer who lived in the US. When they started chatting, he said he lived on an oil rig. They always say they're on an oil rig in the middle of the sea, but would return to the US soon. The pair spoke daily, and the friendship quickly became a massive part of Ava's life. The pair had been talking for 6 months when West was finally supposed to head back to the US. But there was one problem. Airport security stopped him when he tried to board his flight, and he needed money to leave. So Ava sent him $1,270 to help him get home. Her mother recently passed away and left her house to Ava, so she didn't mind sending a little bit of cash. She attempted to send the funds through the post office, but employees told her not to do it because they thought it seemed suspicious. But instead of listening to their warnings, she just went and sent the money through her bank. When Ava's daughter-in-law found out about the situation, she tried to convince her that it was a scam. So Ava confronted West, who dismissed her concerns, saying that everyone is accused of being a scammer these days, and said he would pay her back as soon as possible. Since he gave her the affection she needed, his excuses always seemed legitimate, so Ava just continued on. But West always seemed to have terrible luck, like the time his daughter was in an accident and he couldn't afford to pay her medical bills. He always leaned on Ava for help, and when her money ran out, he convinced her to sell her house and car. West reminded her that it would all be worth it, as he was going to move to the UK to be with her and buy her a massive house. It wasn't until Ava's son, Stephen, uncovered the scam after rushing his mother to the hospital over a life-threatening infection that the thing came apart. He had been holding on to his mother's phone, which was going crazy while they were in the resuscitation room. Stephen saw some of the messages and realized that West was sending a large sum of money to his mother's house. The concerned son found out that West frequently sent Ava cash packages that she would pay into different bank accounts as part of a money laundering syndicate. Apparently, Ava was embarrassed about what she was doing and didn't want to tell anyone what was happening. Unfortunately, investigators couldn't get Ava's money back, as the cash was overseas and impossible to track. Now is a good time to remind you to try and keep an eye on anyone who's in an online relationship. These scams are clearly on the rise, and the best defense against it is to be surrounded by those who care. It can happen to anyone, regardless of wealth or fame, even friends of Stevie Nicks. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay tuned right here for our past release to find out how this sugar baby tried to scam $1 million from her sugar daddy. Number 1. No money in Brazilian country music. Brazilian country music singer Wagner Oliveira stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from women he met on dating apps. Oliveira Oliveira set up multiple dating app profiles under different names and occupations. He had multiple identities, such as an entrepreneur in the agricultural business or the father of 2 girls. Apparently, country music in Brazil doesn't pay all the bills. Oliveira targeted single mothers because, if anyone has a ton of money, it's a single mom. And after contacting them on an app, then asking for their phone numbers so they could talk on WhatsApp. The singer would charm his victims by professing his love for them and sharing his dream of building a family, which seems to be romance scammer 101. And it worked too. The women fell hard for him, and once he got close, he would start asking them to lend him money. Oliveira told several lies about why he needed the money, such as waiting for cash from projects he had completed or money from real estate sales. His victims took out loans to get him the money he needed, with one woman sending him $1,720 and another handing over $4,350. Another victim claimed Oliveira used her personal information to borrow $2,430 in her name. Oliveira, ever the charmer, would get mean and aggressive when his victims refused to pay and used psychological tricks to get them to hand money over. He pressured a woman into financing a car but pocketed the money she gave him and never made a payment for the vehicle. While he was shopping with one of his other victims, Oliveira convinced her to put roughly $1,400 on her card. He also used the same woman's information to finance a Fiat, which left her in over $26,000 of debt. Oliveira further swindled over $203,000 out of at least 26 women. Police arrested him in December of 2023 while investigating him for embezzlement, coercion, and theft. If he's convicted, he faces 18 years in prison. He's like some weird reverse country singer that sings about stealing everything in a relationship rather than losing. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section what you'd rather do if you could only pick one. Find potential dates only in real life or only use apps for dating.